with any electronic devices. Apologies for net inputs and maybe some other members coming in shortly. Draft minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of October are there for your consideration, and if you're content with their accuracy, then I'll
start using the Adobe Reader.
accordingly.
Yeah. That's good.
Okay, thank you very much. There's no matters arising at this stage, so let's move on to the next item of agenda, which is the update on the delivery of the prison reform programme. So if they want to come in, that would be great. The relevant pages for members are 13 to 66 of your meeting folder. Members may also wish to obviously take the opportunity to raise any issues relating to the implementation of the Northern Ireland Prison Services State Strategy, the briefing that we received from the Prison Officers Association last week, and a report by the SIGINI, a joint inspection with them and RQIA into the safety of prisoners held by the Northern Prison Service, which was published earlier today, and that those reports are in your table pack. So let me welcome Sue McAllister, Director General of the Northern Ireland Prison Service, and Mark McAdam, Director of Human Resources and Corporate Services, Paul Coughlwell, Director of Offender Policy and Operations, and Brian McCaughey, Director of Rehabilitation. And you're all very welcome to the meeting today. And as normal, we'll record it by Hansard, and then that'll be published in due course. So, Sue, I'm going to hand over to you at this stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your welcome. We're grateful for the opportunity to brief you today. Members have requested an update on the reform programme and on the issue of drugs in our prisons. While I will provide that for you, we are of course happy to answer any questions you may have on wider prison issues. This Friday is the 3rd anniversary of the publication of the Prison Review Team report, led by Dame Anne Owers. As you're aware, that report made 40 wide-ranging, challenging recommendations that, in her words, would transform the prison system in Northern Ireland. To date, the Prison Review Oversight Group, which is chaired by the Minister, has deemed 16 of the 40 recommendations as complete. The group has also referred a further 17 to the Criminal Justice Inspectorate and the RQIA, as appropriate, for independent assessment. This brings the number of recommendations which have been completed or referred to 33. The remaining 7 will be brought to the Oversight Group in December this year and March next year. That represents significant progress against the 40 recommendations. I'll say something about the financial outlook. All of this work is being progressed at a time of great financial pressure across the public sector. The prison service is no different, and we face many challenges to live within the budget provided to us. Over the past few years, we've made significant progress to ensure we deliver value for money to the public. Since devolution and the start of the reform programme, the cost per prisoner place has decreased from $73,732 in 2010 to $62,898 this year, with the target by the end of this financial year of $60,800. That equates to a 21% reduction. However, in the future, further cuts to the budget will inevitably have an adverse effect on prison reform. The prison service has already endured, against the backdrop of a rising prisoner population, a baseline reduction of 15% over the last 4 years. When the PRT report was published in 2011, it had been envisaged that any savings from the voluntary early retirement scheme would be reinvested in the prison service. With the current economic situation, that will not now be possible. These are all challenges, not just for the senior team before you today, but for everyone in our service. No one will be immune from the challenges that lie ahead. That includes our public sector colleagues and partners in the voluntary and community sectors. But I don't want to simply highlight the difficulties in the future. We are making progress. Since we were before the committee in April, a number of significant developments have taken place. The voluntary early retirement scheme has concluded, with 518 staff leaving our service. Our adult male step-down facility, Burren House, has opened. This provides a step-down facility for male prisoners who are on a phased return back into the community, and it was a key recommendation of the Prison Review Team report. Our drug recovery unit pilot at Glen House in Maghaberry has worked with 12 prisoners with serious addiction issues. This finished last week, and while it is now being evaluated, the early signals are that it has been a tremendous success. We've opened a new training facility for female prisoners at Hydebank Wood. A review of psychology services has been completed and is being implemented. Learning and development for our staff continues to be rolled out. Progress has been made in our estate strategy with approval for a new 360 block at Maghaberry. And a huge amount of work has taken place at Hydebank Wood in preparation for the Hydebank College opening next spring. A curriculum is being developed with colleagues in Colleges NI, which will focus on educational and vocational skills, including work to deliver basic literacy and numeracy. These are just a few examples of the positive work that's taken place. This has been achieved through the determination and hard work of the staff involved. Again, I would like to say today that I value the commitment that our staff bring to their roles. Talking about other challenges, the budget is not the only challenge we face. We've seen a significant increase in the prisoner population in the last 10 years, and particularly in the last 5 years. This has led to accommodation issues and crowding in certain parts of the prison estate. You'll have heard from the Prison Officers Association last week, where they highlighted their concerns about staffing levels and safety in prisons. As Director General, I want to be as clear as I can possibly be. We do not tolerate violence in our prisons, whether that is on staff or on prisoners. Any assault is one too many and is unacceptable. We all know prisons can be difficult places to work, and we deal with some very challenging people, but that is no excuse for assaulting people who are just doing their job and serving the people of Northern Ireland. As the leadership team, I can assure the committee that we give this issue the highest priority, and I am sure you'll wish to discuss this further today. I would just like to make a few brief remarks which Paul can elaborate on as part of our discussion. All of our information points to the issue of crowding as a major factor in the number of assaults. That is why we have taken steps to address this. Over 300 prisoners have been relocated to other accommodation. This greatly reduces the pressure in areas such as Lagan House, which had a population of 180 and now houses 130 prisoners. I've spoken to some of the staff who work there who have told me that this has had a positive impact on them and on prisoners. The POA also highlighted the issue of staff numbers. They are correct when they say we are currently running below our target staffing level. Whilst most of this shortfall can be covered through overtime, we are hopeful that we will be able to embark on a limited recruitment process in the near future. Discussions on this are at an early stage. In fact, Mark spoke to the Department's Permanent Secretary last week on this issue. We're conscious of the current financial climate, but we firmly believe that further recruitment will be necessary. We also have to continue to robustly challenge sick absence. While 3/4 of our staff have not taken sick in the last 12 months, it is still too high. This impacts on the officers on the ground, and we, as a management team, are determined to address this serious issue. The POA also highlighted their calls to give officers pepper spray. While Parva is available to be used by specially trained officers, its use has to be authorised by me as Director General. While we remain open-minded regarding general deployment of Parva, we are taking advice from the Health and Safety Executive, and that will play a large part in our final decision. However, I would reaffirm that the evidence at this stage indicates that crowding is the major factor, and as I've said, we were taking steps to address that. We have a good relationship with the POA, and I want to see that continue. We will continue to discuss all of these matters with them in an honest and professional way. We will not always agree, but we are committed to that process of engagement with them. On drugs, members have requested a further update on drugs in our prisons. I know you received a written paper on this issue following our previous appearance in April. Let me start by saying drug and substance misuse is a significant issue. It would be naive to think an issue that is a problem in the community would not be replicated in the prison environment. As I have said, we deal with some very challenging individuals who have a range of addiction and mental health problems. You may have seen the report published today by the Criminal Justice Inspectorate on prisoner safety. It lays out the scale of the challenge we inherit when people are taken out of the community and sent to prison. The report states that up to 5,000 prisoners use healthcare each year. 1,000 will have a personality disorder. It also says that 67% of prisoners are on prescribed medication. Possibly the starkest figure found that 90% of prisoners have a diagnosable mental health problem, substance misuse problem, or both. That is the scale of the problem we face, along with our partners in health. And that is why we take a three-pronged approach to drugs. The first part is focused on blocking supply, and since the introduction of intelligence-led searching, the number of drug finds has increased. The second involves educating people in custody on the health risks associated with misusing drugs. Finally, the service supports those who want to break the cycle of addiction. As I've said, the drug recovery pilot that has been running is one example of our innovative approach to this issue. There has also been some comment recently regarding the reliability of our data, that we do not include those who refuse to take a test. I can assure you that we do include those people in our statistics, and they are recorded as a failure. We stand over our data as an accurate reflection of drug use in our prisons. Moving on to talk about the big issues for us next quarter. Like every part of the public sector, the prison service faces many challenges in the time ahead. We're now entering the final 6 months of the formal part of our reform programme, and we see this as the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. Reform and change will be a constant theme of our service for years to come. All of this will have to be progressed within our budget, and that will take innovation to ensure we get the best possible outcomes from the investments we make. In conclusion, prisons can be difficult places to work, but they can also be hugely rewarding. Our service is firmly focused on playing its part in making Northern Ireland a safer place for everyone. As I have set out, we do face huge challenges, but I believe the reform programme has put us in a place where we are capable of meeting those through leadership and, most importantly, partnership with our staff, with unions, with our delivery partners and, indeed, with this committee. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak this afternoon, and we would welcome any questions you have on the issues I've raised or, indeed, on any other area of our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. In terms of your target staffing level, let me just confirm the figures. You've said that Finlay's figures were accurate. TSL is supposed to be 1,319, and so you're currently 91 below that. Is that accurate?
Well, I'll ask Mark to talk about target staffing levels in a moment, but just to put it into some sort of context, as we move forward to live within a reducing budget and as we move to reassess what our priorities will be, we would not expect to have a static target staffing figure. We would expect that we would reprofile at least annually, possibly even more frequently if requirements dictate that. So any figure that you are given would only be a snapshot in time, and we wouldn't be able to stand over any figure given the requirement to constantly reprofile. But Mark, would you want to say anything else about those figures?
Yeah, well, as Sue says, it's a constant moving feast, but we are significantly below that. That worried to me going and having a conversation with the Permanent Secretary about the need to recruit, because of now reopening that pipeline and being able to bring people in, because it's not an instant process to do that with staff turnover, with leavers, with changes and things like that. We couldn't carry that kind of difference. Although there's a healthy amount of overtime, which actually works in everybody's favour to keep some flexibility, maintaining that around in its 90s doesn't give us flexibility for either sides, and we need to start to close that gap.
Paul, do you want to?
I could probably clarify that the last time we took stock on our staffing position was about 6 weeks ago, and that indicated that at McGilligan it was quite close to parity, I think about 2% variance. At Hyde Bank it was just over 5%, but there is accommodation closed at Hyde Bank, so that's not pressing. And at McGabbery it was at 6.8%. By contrast, in March this year it was 11% shortfall, and all of the 6.8% is being paid back with use of overtime.
Okay. In terms of the recruitment process that you've talked about, a limited type of recruitment process, what trigger points do you use as a service to identify this is what we should have, we now need to do something? Because the accusation could be that you have failed to make sure you're going to have an adequate level of staff, that you're now at a significantly lower point. So what's the criteria for assessing when you need to have recruitment?
Well, I think, as we've said and we continue to say, any gap between the number of staff we should have and the number of staff that we physically do have, any gap can be filled by using overtime, because obviously we have that money that we're not paying in salaries, and we can use that for overtime, and that gives management flexibility, and it gives staff the opportunity to augment their salaries through overtime. So that's the context. So we're not physically short of hours. The other thing to say is that the level at which our staff are leaving is within the acceptable limit for an organisation like ours, in the current economic climate, where other organisations are recruiting at higher salaries. So again, we are watching very carefully how many staff are leaving, but we're not yet anxious that that's risen above expected levels. What we need to be able to do, though, to answer your question, is have a pipeline that we can turn on and off. So we need to have a way of bringing staff into the service so that as people leave, we don't then have to start a recruitment process that inevitably has a long tail. So we're looking to switch on a recruitment pipeline, and that's the discussion that we're having with the Permanent Secretary now, so that there doesn't have to be a trigger point, so that we can actually bring people in, rather than bringing them in one big lot as we did previously. We can bring them in gradually. Mark, do you want to say any more?
Yeah, there's two parts. I mean, we're running at around a turnover of around 10%, which, as Sue says, is relatively healthy. It's higher than what the prison service has been used to in the past, but it's not out of step with broader industry. The other bit that we need to look at is we've done a fair amount of promotions over the last 6 to 9 months. So a number of people have moved up and on within our organisation. So we're looking to take up recruitment in 2 waves. One, to look at our existing escort service and do a certain amount of recruitment from that, and then an external recruitment to backfill those jobs within escorts as well. But we will always keep that healthy element of flexibility with overtime, because that works for staff and it works for us as well, rather than closing that option off completely.
The 10% turnover that you referenced, how much of that 10% is made up of those at the custody officer level?
Most of that would be the new staff, and we're doing a fair amount of work to understand why that is happening. We know that for some people, they find that it's not the job for them, and we're pleased that they recognise that at an early stage and feel able to move on to do something else. And we're looking at how we can induct people into the service in a slightly different way, so that they get the opportunity to experience the environment, perhaps before they have to commit to it. So the majority is the cadre of new custody officers, not least because they are the ones who would be attracted, for example, when the police recruit and can recruit at a high salary, whereas for the main grade officers that wouldn't be the case.
So they review the recruitment process, will look at exposing them maybe to an environment that they're coming in,
Yeah,
some would say a
absolutely
little bit in ignorance of, and then realise.
Yes, and that's quite difficult to do, because prisons by their very nature are closed environments, so it's very difficult to bring people in and give them a real taste. But yes, we need to think about how we do that.
I think it's important to note as well, within that 10%, if you're looking at where most of the movement occurs, and that's at McGabbery, over half of the resignations in 2014 have been because people have moved to other jobs, and that's not unexpected with the cadre staff that we were recruiting. Just under 1/10 went for domestic reasons, one was dismissed, and only a third left without giving a reason, and that was the area where we would be of most concern.
In terms of the sick levels, for those that are on sick leave, how many of those relate to being assaulted?
Well, I think the important thing to say, first of all, as we've said, is 75% of our staff have had no sick. And we know that that figure is fairly constant. So the sick represents a reasonably small percentage of our staff. Do you have? I don't have the actual
About
figures.
15%.
15.
Yeah.
15.
In terms of how you work with those staff that have been assaulted, is there flexibility in the sick leave policy? Because some people that I've spoken to have indicated to me that after having been assaulted, and I accept every organisation needs a robust sick policy that's so that nobody abuses, obviously, the sick leave. But if you're assaulted, what's the differential treatment for people in that scenario?
But let's be clear. I think one of the things you might be talking about, Chairman, is the issue of warnings to people and progressing them through our process. We do allow management discretion in how the policy is implemented, and we have resisted any attempt to have a uniform approach, because there will always be some cases that need a more flexible approach, sometimes a very, very long-term sympathetic approach. So yes, we would take into consideration why somebody is off sick and whether they've received injuries at work. However, that doesn't mean that we can't manage the sickness of people who are sick as a result of being assaulted. We have to do that in fairness to them. So we have to discuss with them how and whether they envisage being able to return to work, whether we can make any adjustments, whether we can offer them alternatives, because every person who's off sick puts pressure on the people who remain at work, and pressure on our numbers, particularly at a time when budgets are constrained. But we believe that we have got much better in supporting our colleagues who are sick and in having sensible discussions with them about return to work and about what we can do as managers to support them while they're off sick. So it's very much not a one-size-fits-all, and it's certainly not a punitive approach to people being off sick. It is very much a supportive approach.
One of the things that we've put in place is a moderation process right the way across all of our prisons and also our headquarters, to make sure we're applying those rules consistently, because as you can imagine, managers, well, given flexibility, apply that flexibility slightly differently, and we're trying to standardise that approach in terms of, and that's why we have been quite clear that warnings are not a mandatory thing to apply just because somebody's gone or they have been involved in a serious incident. So we are looking at applying that flexibility. What support do we put in place? We're just in the process of exploring some training that helps support people in resilience and helping people get back to work. We have a good support mechanism from CareCall to put behind staff, and we are looking at actually how we take a more moderate approach to where we need to, but also are absolutely robust where we have people that are putting pressure on those staff. I mean, it's important to note that we have over 70% of our staff do not take sick. We have a hugely committed workforce, and when people do take sick, that puts a lot of pressure on those committed staff, and we've got to make sure that they can see that there's the appropriate sanctions, but at the same time not being a negligent organisation that doesn't care about people that suffer to deliver their jobs. And it is about finding that balance, getting a consistency, and make sure we apply it the same way for everyone.
In terms of then, just if we can touch on the assaults, obviously the figures that I've been getting would indicate a pretty bleak picture. Certainly the attacks on staff, and when you look at Maghaberry, not that long ago, it was single figures, and it's increased quite substantially since then. But what I'd be interested in hearing is how you categorise an assault. Well, obviously, you can be assaulted to varying degrees, and I would be interested to get behind the figures in terms of how you would categorise an assault.
I think it's probably best to let Paul answer that, because he's been the person leading a significant amount of analysis of our assaults.
Direct answer to the direct question. Historically, since 2002, NIPS has followed a line that says, you must be disabled to the extent that you would lose 3 days from work, that this could be a hospitalisation, and it listed examples of fractures, concussion injuries, but the bottom line was the expectation would be that you would be debilitated for more than 3 days. That was the policy from 2002, and that was the yardstick that was used to measure performance until last year. And then last year, we moved away from that description and said we would capture anything that an establishment told us was an assault, which typically meant anything that was entered into the health and safety accident books, which is the individual's perception of the injury. And so there are items being recorded within that mass now, which certainly wouldn't have been captured in previous years. And it virtually is in the eye of the beholder if they consider it to have been an assault.
Well, that change, though, wouldn't account for the figures in the previous number of years. If the policy only changed last year, the increase of recording the level of assaults actually didn't go up that much compared to the previous year. So you had a pattern 4 or 5 years ago, it was single figures, and then it has progressively increased. There wasn't a dramatic change in the record of assaults on the basis of that policy change.
I think the figures that have been laid out, and particularly those that were rightly referred to by the trade union partners, are accurate, and that does precisely point to a change in the definition in September 2013. That actually it was fairly stable in the business years up until 2013, and then in 2013 there is the step up. But if you're looking at, if you go on the calendar years,
What are those figures? Sorry, Paul.
then they would show that in the business year 2012 to 2013, across the at Magabry it was 36 assaults, McGilligan 3 and Hydebank 10. In the business year, the following year, 2013-14, which included the change of definition during the course of that year, it went to 67, 6 and 23. The actual increase, if you're looking at calendar years, is an increase of 10%, 10.1% across the 2 calendar years, which is unacceptable, but that's set against an increase in the prison population of 6.7% at the same time.
Okay. Well, that's useful. Let me bring in some other members, and then I'll come back with a few other points. Mr. Frew.
Yeah, just on that point, Paul, I hear what you're saying, and I know a change of definition will skew figures dramatically. And it's fair to say, yes, Magabry, 86% of an increase in those 2 years that the definition changed. But how then do you explain that in the 5 years period, if you look at over a period of 5, where it went from 4 assaults, single figures, and I assume, not saying the figures, but I assume it stayed in single figures beyond that or previous to that. It then goes quite rapidly up to 36. And now we're trying to explain away the 67 assaults, yes, last year. But how do you answer the sharp increase from 4 to 36 in a period of 5 years?
I don't think I can stand over the data from 2008-09. I'm struggling to think of any prison I've ever encountered that would only report 4 assaults taking place during the course of a year. That really it would be quite a remarkable feat. There are reasons for the step changes, not least of all the increase in the size of the population over that time. What I can say is, I think it's important that we don't focus exclusively on those which are recorded as assaults on members of staff, because they make up a very small proportion of the actual violent incidents in custody, the overwhelming majority of which are prisoner on prisoner, which inevitably require an officer in a white shirt to step in between and put themselves at risk. Yeah. And if you look at what we've done over the last 2 years, is looked at every violent incident in our custody, where it took place, when it took place, what were the circumstances, and that showed us that actually violence is down, and down quite significantly, counting all assaults, and it also gave us the direct causal feed that said crowding is what's driving this, to eradicate crowding, and also suggested that high staffing levels don't offer you protection because the fewest number of assaults occurred at weekends when we have the lowest number of staff on duty.
What are the figures for prisoner and prisoner assault?
In terms of the prisoner-on-prisoner assaults,
Let's say for 2013, 2014, and then the previous year, 2012, 2013, for, say, Macgabber.
I've got what I've got. If I mean, I wouldn't have the actual outturn against that. What I can do is tell you the improvement rate, the percentage rate against each of those years, and suggest here that you'll usually find that the rate of prisoner-on-prisoner assaults versus staff assaults is about 6 or 7 times higher. It's the significant contributor.
Why would you have percentage? Why would you have percentage success rates but not the actual figure?
For ease of presentation.
We can
That's
get you
what
the,
I've got.
we can
I
get
can
you
certainly
the
write
figures
to you with
and
those.
write to you and provide them for you.
Chair, I think that would be useful if we could have, say, the last 6 years, if that would be okay, for all 3 prison.
Yeah, we can do that.
Can I go back to, we can talk about the number, and unfortunately everything will be a statistic, but I was alarmed last week in questioning Mr Hardy, he was along with Mr Spratt, and we talked about the prisoner-on-prisoner assaults, and this is what Mr Hardy had to say, and I quote: "More scarily, the level of violence has increased. Previously, an assault might have been a few punches or something. Now we're getting milk buckets full of boiling water poured over people, as happened in Braid House. It may be that 2 or 3 prisoners get one inmate in the exercise yard and forget when to stop until we get there. So the level of violence is increasing in certain cases. Before, it would sometimes just have been handbags at dawn, but no, it is getting more serious. That applies to prisoner-on-prisoner assaults as well as prisoner-on-staff assault." Could I asked the question then, could the severity levels be down to the fact that you have not got the staff to handle it, to react quickly and to deal with it when they get there? Mr Hardy replied, yes.
I would challenge the assertion that the nature or the severity of assaults has changed markedly over years. We know that, sadly, for many years in this jurisdiction and in other jurisdictions, there have been very, very serious assaults in our prisons, and thankfully they remain in very small numbers. So I would suggest that those events, which clearly staff felt very threatened by, don't constitute the whole story. So I don't think we continue to look and base our decisions on good evidence, but I would challenge that is borne out by the fact that the violence in our prisons, as Paul's already said, is level of violence is going down in terms of the number of assaults, and the qualitative nature of that analysis, which remains to be done, I would expect will not tell us that we used to have handbags at dawn and now we have very, very serious assaults. I simply think that is not correct.
That information and that evidence would be recorded somewhere, somehow?
Well, interestingly, we've been doing some work to look at how we record incidents, and we know that we have some work to do to introduce a robust and detailed incident reporting system, which we may have been used to in previous roles. So I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how good the record keeping has been, but certainly from now, drawing a line from now, we are making sure that we do have that qualitative evidence to support any assertion that things are changing.
Yes, you could say that the Mr Hardy's answering and assumptions were anecdotal. It would be hard to argue that your rationale and your answer is not anecdotal also, because you haven't got that fact and evidence.
What's not in dispute is the fact that if you're looking at last year compared to this year, that the level of assaults within prisons are down by over 18%. That is not in question. If you're looking specifically at January to August in each year, it's down by over 24%. So that is not there for debate. That is a matter of fact and accepted by the trade union.
And I think the other thing that I'm saying, Paul, is that it is not the case that serious assaults did not happen in the past when we had very high staffing levels, because they actually did. And we know that, you know, prisoners were suffered very serious injuries, as did staff in our prisons, sometimes to the point of death.
Yes.
So what we're trying to say is that it is not as simple as high staffing levels are a guarantee that violence will not occur. It is much more sophisticated than that. What I would say is that there is a dimension to this about what we call dynamic security, which is where the nature of the relationships that our staff have with prisoners is so good that they de-escalate many situations that would result in assault. So again, we need to see it in the context. And I have personally spent time working alongside colleagues on the landings in all 3 prisons now, and have been impressed by that. I have not felt that the levels of staff that I've seen or experienced have been unsafe, and have felt confident that we had staff to respond to emergencies.
Why did you turn down the request for the use of pepper spray?
What I alluded to, we have not turned down a request for the use of pepper spray. We're seeking advice from the Health and Safety Executive, but it's important to say we already have pepper spray. We already have pepper spray. Actually is a weapon, and there are legal controls that have to be in place for the use of pepper spray. So we do have pepper spray. We have trained staff who carry Parva pepper spray. And I would have no hesitation in authorising the use of Parva if I believed it to be justified. Up until now, I have not felt that any situation has merited the use of pepper spray, and I have, as has Paul and Max Murray, we do the on-call between us, we all have considerable experience of dealing with serious incidents in prisons. But we do have it, and we would use it if we needed to.
What was stressed to the trade unions was that any decision would have to be evidence-based, and there is no evidence at this moment in time that would suggest that that would be a better deterrent than the measures that are already being taken, which include taking 350 men out of crowded conditions, looking at improving the lock-in schedules within the prisons, which will speed up response times to incidents, and also looking at what's there in legislation to protect staff within prisons.
Last question, Chairman. Mr. Spratt last week talked about the fear of losing a prison, losing control of a prison. What keeps you up at night? Is that a worry that you have? And what would the cost of that be, both in human terms and in cost in pounds and pence?
I don't say this flippantly, but I sleep well at night. I have confidence in the arrangements that we have for contingency, for managing incidents. I have seen, heard, witnessed nothing that suggests to me that we have any unrest or potential unrest in our prisons, and I know that there is always the unexpected and the unplanned. I don't think it's helpful to talk in that way. I think our staff deserve better leadership than that. They deserve us to share with them our confidence in them, in us as leaders of this organisation, and in our planning arrangements. We test our contingency plans regularly. We review them to make sure that we can deal with the unexpected and unplanned. We have 24-hour on-call cover at all levels in our organisation so that we can respond to incidents.
Thank you very much for your answers. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you. Mr McCartney.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I just want to refer to the update we got from the Oversight Group, and they have asked that 6 recommendations go out for independent assessment, and I noted 2 of them is personalised custody and sentence planning and integration of service delivery with the probation service. Was there any particular reason for independent assessment, or is this to seek that the recommendations are fully applied to?
I'll ask Brian and Mark between them to answer that, I think.
Shall I start with the process? So for all our recommendations, we seek an independent assurance. So it goes through 2 stages. It goes through the Minister chaired the independent board, where they will look at that and then they will refer that to Criminal Justice Inspectorate for everything that relates to prisons, and any health recommendations go to RQIA. So we always ask for validation of what we've done and whether or not we've done that meeting the full spirit of the recommendations. So we do it with them all.
And you're right, 29 was about the assessment of risk and need, 30 was about the new prisoner development model, and 31 was the aligned working of prisons and probation. I think my answer to that would be I had done the work in presenting the theory about how it would work. CJI are out to see it in practice.
You're sort of, I mean, happy enough that that's going in the right direction?
Well, I have to say, and I appreciate the committee's comments in the lead up to this question, I am absolutely convinced that the prison service is in a process of transformation, and those recommendations, particularly number 30, recommendation 30, places the prison officer at the centre of all interaction with the prisoner, is the coordinator of the personal development plan for prisoners, and holds all other providers to account. And I think that's a very, very significant change and will transform how prisons will work. And whilst we've talked an awful lot about assaults, I have been absolutely full of praise for the staff who have demonstrated their ability to engage purposefully with hope and optimism with some of the prisoners, with many of the prisoners, indeed the report referred today, who come to us with many, many difficulties. And those are the things that I think we should be acknowledging.
Okay. And just to follow on from that, recommendation 36 is the new custodial facility for women. Is there an update? And is there an update and where we're at with that?
Well, in terms of, there are two strands to our plans for women, as you know. We have the step down for women, for which we're waiting the outcome of a planning application. That will be the open facility where we can test women in less secure conditions. And in terms of the secure facility for women, that's progressing. We remain absolutely committed to providing that facility, even with the inevitable constraints on funding.
Yeah. And in our last visit to Maghaberry, in speaking to the senior management team, they said that one of their biggest challenges, now there was a number, but they certainly said that prisoner access to drugs posed a major challenge. And you can read all that flows from it, and I'd say assaults and all flows from that, and obviously health profile is part of that as well. But when you see this Jenny report, now this is obviously a quality of life survey, but the illegal drugs play a high profile, obviously, the prescription drugs, and they talked about their measures towards that. But in relation to one of the recommendations around the sort of use of the X-ray or the body scanner, given the nature of a high level of illegal drugs, I mean, 3 years on, and we don't seem to be, we've heard about a quality assurance and certificates, but we don't seem to be any closer to delivering what might help combat that.
As you know, we've applied for permission to trial the X-ray body scanner, and we have to apply through the Westminster Government for that, because it's not a devolved matter. So we're awaiting the outcome of that application, and then we will pilot the X-ray equipment. And one of the things that it will help us with is our drug strategy. But we do know that it is likely to be a challenge in terms of potential health risks and possible other health concerns. So we are bound by the legal loopholes that we have to go through to get that equipment. We'd love to trial it now, yeah, but we have to go through that process.
But does the process seem a bit long, or is that?
We've never done it before, and it's never been done before, so nobody's ever applied for it, so we've got nothing to benchmark it against. But yes, it does seem to be taking an inordinately long time.
And in terms of the relationship between, I mean, obviously overcrowding, assaults, and just the general, in terms of, I mean, I'm using assaults as a sort of maybe a crude barometer, but McGilligan has less assaults than Highbank and Maghaberry. Are there things being done in Magilligan different from Highbank and different to Maghaberry gets that outcome? Obviously, prisoner profile has a part to play in that as well.
And interestingly, McGilligan is where we have our lowest staffing levels, so that also, obviously there is an element of selection in who goes to McGilligan, and it doesn't have high security prisoners, and it doesn't have prisoners on remand for whom uncertainty is an issue. It is comparing apples and pears, really. I mean, Maghaberry is a prison that is multifunctional, that's a local, high security, and McGilligan has a much more settled population. Do you want to add anything to that, Paul?
No, it's reinforcing that. And today, CGNE and RQIA published a report. We set out the challenge that prison officers have to contend with on a day-to-day basis in terms of what the population looks like. And that is what Maghaberry are exposed to. There is an element of pre-selection when it comes to McGilligan. They are all known quantities when they arrive there. The bit that gives me reassurance is if you're looking at drug testing in all 3 prisons and compare this year with last year, there are significant improvements in terms of outcomes. We regularly test. We understand what the baseline of drug use looks like in those prisons. We still believe we're testing for the appropriate substances. And if you're looking at the first half of the year, at Maghaberry, it's halved this year compared to the first half of last year. At McGilligan, it's down to nearly a quarter, and at High Bankwood, it's down a third.
But in terms, I mean, and you always have to be mindful of no movement of prisoners, but are you satisfied that categorising prisoners to move to McGilligan is as quick and perhaps as robust as what it should be?
Well, we changed, or we reviewed our categorisation policies last year. That was with a particular preference to deal with women and young offenders, but that also gave us an opportunity to look at our general categorisation policy. That does actually allow us now to categorise somebody as suitable for open on day 1 in custody, whereas before they had to be in custody for several months. The inhibitor on moving people quickly through to McGilligan is the fact that we run it full. It's got the best, it's safe, it's got good facilities for training and opportunities, so we like to keep it full, and so we could categorise people even quicker, but they would just be stacking up at Maghaberry ready to move when there's a vacancy.
Which sort of brings me on to, is there room to expand? I mean, obviously the new build is still very much in the thinking, but even in the short term, if McGilligan has been successful in creating it, and you can see in Maghaberry, I've said it before, Maghaberry has every category of prisoner, intertwining and all that. But McGilligan, when you go down, there's always that feeling that, the Minister said the other day in the Housing Service, when you go down to visit it in Foyle, most of the prisoners are out during the day, you don't see them. So therefore, that's a model that's working. How do you get more people into McGilligan, at least to take the pressure off other parts of the system?
Well, I mean, as Paul says, we keep McGilligan full, so it holds 571 prisoners, and it will have 571 prisoners at the end of every week. So we take typically two shipments of people up there per week. And interestingly, I did a shift on the induction on the committal landing at McGilligan a few weeks ago, and actually witnessed for myself the process that people go through, and I was hugely impressed at how prisoners who perhaps might not want to be up in that part of the country, or might not understand why they've suddenly been told that's where they're going, they're put at their ease, given confidence that this is the right place, and perhaps that's also why we witness fewer incidents. I mean, the quality of the interaction was very, very good. We just don't have any more buildings. We've even looked at whether we could put some quick build prefabricated units into McGilligan for exactly that reason. But the length of time it takes to source those and the cost is actually doesn't represent value for money. So that's why we need to progress the McGilligan business case. And in fact, it is progressing. I had a bilateral meeting with Max Murray, Director of Estates, yesterday, and he told me that the McGilligan outline business case is progressing through the system so that we can get the new build.
Is Foyle at its capacity?
Yes.
At the waiting list.
Yeah.
I know, but I mean, looking at the buildings in Foyle, they don't seem to be too challenging in terms of prefabrication. Like it's nearly like walking into a large like work camp at the edge of a motorway in their 60s. Like, so I'm just wondering if that's the process which you could have in place.
Yeah, and that again, we've looked at that, and it is because we thought exactly that you could just buy some prefabs and drop them in and use them, and it's not. No.
Rules.
Yeah. Rules.
Rules. Yeah, that's hard. But I just see it because, I mean, you look at the statistics, it's obvious, it's working. How do you release this out? And then it would take some of the overcrowding out of it, particularly McAlvey. So maybe common sense is maybe the wrong way to look at it.
I'm so pleased you highlighted it, Paul, because it is a success story, whereas it is full, there is a waiting list for it, but there are now 17 employers who look to take prisoners from and prepare them for release.
In terms of the Open College, could you just provide an update on that? And does the fact that there's still a women's facility in Highbank, limit the potential of the Open College scenario?
Brian, do you want to talk a bit about Highbank College?
Highbank College. We have agreed the design principles for the college. We have done work on the curriculum. We are currently doing training for staff and prisoners on some culture change and how you move from a young offenders centre to a secure college. And we have expanded the vocational training. We are well progressed, Chair, in terms of outsourcing the entire learning skills, which should be complete for 1st of April, the end of the financial year. We hope to have that arrangement agreed at the end of January.
And in terms of the women's facility in Highbank, does that limit your potential?
I don't think so, because we mentioned already Ornella, which is the ground floor of Ash House, which provides vocational training places and activity places. There will still be a need for some of the women to spend time in the Learning and Skills Department, but there is much more available now for the women. So in some ways the women will benefit from the college until such time as they move to the dedicated women's facility.
Okay. And in terms of the segregated blocks, could you just provide an update of how relationships are there?
In Row House?
Row Ambush,
we've just, as you know, the Minister commissioned a stocktake of the arrangements for separated prisoners. He has now received the report from the independent assessors and has this week written to the assessors asking for a meeting to discuss that. So the next steps will be to take forward the recommendations from that report. I think that's probably all we can say on the former stocktake, but the numbers have reduced slightly, so there has been an easing of population pressures with further releases predicted during the coming months.
You haven't been part of that. The Minister and the assessors are still doing their bit of work before you...
Yes. It remains a very challenging environment for our staff, but we remain committed to working with the independent assessors, and we've also had discussions with other groups.
And earlier on, just as the last question, Chair, I think you said there was 518 in the exit scheme. How many new staff? And what's your appraisal?
320 new staff came in as part of the...
Yeah. And what's your appraisal how that's going in terms of younger, training, retraining?
Whenever you go for that amount of stuff, the answer is always going to be mixed. As I say, we have had a number of people who have realised quite quickly this is not the place. We are talking about a challenging environment, and it's not for everybody. However, we have had some fantastic people come in, and when we opened up opportunities for temporary promotions into senior officer, we've had a number of them successful already in achieving promotions. The other part of the process we've been through a very rigorous assessment process, working with University of Ulster on the accreditation process, and the early signs of the people coming through that and receiving their certificates are to an excellent standard, and the universities commended our training side on the quality that was delivered to that, and actually the quality of the people that come through, what they've done, what they've delivered, and how they're going about their jobs.
Yeah.
And the dropout?
As I say, it's around 10%. So we have lost 10% each year of those. partly, as Paul says, because the police are offering a little bit more money than us,
Yeah.
and that's kind of inevitable. Some have gone actually back into study, and some people have genuinely said, I didn't realise this is what I was going into, and there's some learning for us on how
You build a profile up of the reasons why people think
we
that.
have.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Just on the stock take exercise, are you able to tell us what the recommendations or the findings of that have been?
I don't think we're in a position to do that. I'm more than happy to seek permission to do that, Chair, and to brief you separately.
I would appreciate that. In terms of who ultimately will take the decisions around what will or will not happen in terms of the outcome of the stock take?
Well, again, there will be there will be a meeting between the Minister and the independent assessors, but we would expect to have an input into that, as will the managers in Maghaberry. But part of that will be consulting with staff, and actually on a day-to-day basis there is a significant amount of communication continuing between management and staff, between staff and prisoners. So we would always try to include them. We know it will be challenging. We know that it will remain a challenging environment, and that any recommendations will need to be well understood by all parties before we agree how to take them forward.
But who takes that final decision as to what does or doesn't get implemented?
Well, I think that some of those things will be operational decisions, so they will be operational matters to be decided by me and my senior team, and some will be more strategic decisions, which will be for the Minister.
And what criteria is used to break down what's operational and what's strategic? Because one would have assumed both are interlinked.
Well,
Because if you take a strategic decision, it'll have an operational impact, and vice versa.
absolutely, and as you say, it's not. And we're talking. It's difficult to speak hypothetically without being able to use a real example. I think all I would say is that I have confidence that the Minister is very open to hearing advice from us and from experienced staff in Maghaberry, and equally we understand the broader political and strategic context in which we make our operational decisions.
What weight is given to the Maghaberry staff, the management of Maghaberry? You mentioned in consultation that you would expect your senior management team to be consulted, the local staff and that structure would be consulted, and that would all feed into it. What's the weighting that's given to the local view in Maghaberry?
Significant weight. I mean, Paul was at Maghaberry as recently as yesterday. We all spend time in Maghaberry, Paul more than any of us, and we speak regularly. So it would be madness not to include the people who actually do that work on a daily basis in any decision that affects them.
Because in the past, in the Mayor's time, it was Dundonald told the governors there what to do, and there was too much interference. So my experience in Maghaberry when I'm in would suggest to me that there's a disconnect between what Maghaberry thinks should be happening and what I'm hearing the senior management thinks should be happening at Dundonald House.
That could be said about any organisation that I've ever worked in, where there is a headquarters and there is a front line, if you like. We work very, very hard to make sure that we genuinely understand what it is like at the front line for our staff, including spending time with them, making sure that they come and spend time with us and understand all of our issues, so that we minimise that disconnect and that perceived absence of understanding. So I would challenge that we don't listen to them and talk to them and don't understand what it's like. Between us, we have a significant number of years of experience of working in prisons, and we also hugely respect what our colleagues bring to that discussion.
And ultimately, it's the Governor's name that's over the door. The 1953 Act puts the power with the Governor. And they're not passive. They will push back if they have concerns. They directly inform decisions through the Operational Management Board.
Yeah.
How much experience have NFU's folk had in dealing with terrorists in prisons?
Paul,
quite
significantly more than me.
significant.
And what prison was it?
I began my career as a prison officer over 20 years ago in a high security prison which held terrorist offenders, and my last operational post in a prison was as the governor of Whitemore Prison, which by default holds a significant proportion of the terrorist offenders in England's custody.
And would that have been is that a reasonable comparison to make to what's in existence in Rowan Bush as to what's in Whitemore?
When I started my career, they were in different times, and the terrorist threat looked very different at Whitemore then to now, yes. So I think it is relevant.
One of the questions that I asked, and the answer came back in terms of the visitor centre, and I asked about the security specification, and I was intrigued at the response to tell me that the new facilities would be designed to what NIPS consider to be an appropriate level of security equivalent to Home Office design standards. What is the normal criteria that is used to assess security measures for any new facility?
Right. Okay. There is a set of design standards and specifications for everything to do with a prison. So there is a standard cell, there is a standard cell block, and that will be things like the size, it will be the thickness of the walls, it will be all of those things that contribute to physical security. So when designing a visits facility, it would be about the capacity of staff to supervise appropriately. It would be consideration of barriers where appropriate to prevent illicit items being passed, but equally it would be a design that took account of the need for visits to happen in a way which is decent and promotes good family relationships. So I'm not altogether sure, Chair, what statement you're referring to when you refer to the Home Office design specifications.
Specifically about the proposed refurbishment of visitor facilities. Obviously, you've seen the paper that the Republicans want in their wish list, which is appalling, and that's a political comment. I'll not ask you to respond, but in specific to their visitors facility, the response came back to say that because there's concerns about what they want and what you may be willing to give them in terms of the security that could be compromised. So what I asked was what were the specifications, and the response came back a NIPS equivalent to what the Home Office security specifications would be. So I want to know what NIPS regard as an equivalent to Home Office security specification, and is it normal that you would diverge from Home Office?
No, we wouldn't diverge, but we would take account of the different nature of different establishments and indeed of different prisoner groups. So what might be appropriate for McGilligan wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for Maghaberry, and equally we need to have facilities in visits, and I'm talking generally now, not just about the separated prisoners, where enhanced visits can take place, where family visits can take place, and equally where closed visits can take place. So it's a continuum. But no, we wouldn't digress from the specification, because that, as I say, that allows us to safely supervise visits. And equally, that's for the safety and security of prisoners as well as for the safety of the establishment.
I would say, actually, not meaning to contradict, we use the Home Office standards really to save us time and money. You know, if they're telling us the strength of the concrete and how far walls should be apart, it would be daft of us to think with 3 prisons and 29 vans that we can spend that sort of money and outthink them. So we crib designs, but we then use our own judgment and ask, in this context, in the environment we're working with, the prisoners that we're working with, is it sensible to move away from, to possibly lower standards in some cases, to enhance and go to a higher standard because it fits our population? That's a judgment call, but we certainly do crib and plagiarise what the Home Office produced because it saves everybody money.
Well, that was my understanding, that you took the Home Office, but I just found it intriguing that when it came to this separated visitors facility, it'll be a NIPS equivalent, and it'll be one obviously that I'll pursue. I take it you've all read the Steele report.
On separation?
Yeah.
Yes.
And the Steele report made it emphatically clear in respect of that there would be controlled movement, that they wouldn't have 24-hour unlocks, free to do whatever they want. And obviously, reading the Republicans' wish list in terms of their document, that's exactly what they want, and the Steele report said should be emphatically stated would never happen by government.
Yes.
In terms of you as Director General, do you stand by what the Steele report said in relation to that?
Yes.
And that'll be your assessment in terms of the response to that particular demand that was being made?
Well, obviously, as I've said before, this is the Minister's report, but you've absolutely correctly stated that the conditions document that you've referred to is a list of things that a group of prisoners is asking for. That's what it is, and it will then be for us to determine which, if any of those are acceptable, given the fact that this is a high security facility, given the fact that we need to control that environment and maintain security in that environment. So, at the risk of preempting what the discussions between the Minister and the independent assessors and subsequently our work will deliver, I hope that gives you some confidence.
It certainly will help. Obviously, there's a real concern for a number of people that we would go back to what it was like in the maze. I know what it was like from my own family's point of view. I know what it was like whenever my uncle was subjected to being stripped and his uniform taken off him whenever the provisionals had control. So that's somewhere where I think a lot of people don't want to ever go back again to. And I have very real concerns at what I'm hearing in terms of, one, the demands that are being made, which I would anticipate, but secondly, the level of interest and interference that is being inputted into this process by Dundonald House and the local establishment not being given the proper weight that it should be given to determine the outcome of this.
I'm very sorry that some of my colleagues feel like that, and I will again say, as I've said on many occasions, that I am absolutely committed to delivering a safe, secure and decent prison service, and that means safe for all of my colleagues and secure for the communities in Northern Ireland.
Okay. We'll go on to a few more members of some questions. Mr. McGuinness.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome. And seems to me that steady progress has been made in relation to the prison reform programme, and that's to be welcomed. A lot of the questions I wanted to ask have already been asked. I'm not going to retread. I just wanted to say that I do share colleagues' concerns in relation to the apparent increase in assaults, and I understand some of the reasons for that, and also in relation to the availability of drugs within prison, and I think that should be a top priority to try and deal with that, and I know that steps are being made to deal with it, but nonetheless I think there should be a further effort made to deal with that problem, because I don't think that you can run a prison properly if drugs are freely available. It's as simple as that. The other point I wanted to make was in relation to Magilligan. Despite its buildings, despite its geographic isolation, seems to work and seems to work well, and I think that's important. Can you import any of that ethos from Magilligan into the Young Offenders Centre and in the development of the Secure College? Because it seems to me that that should be a top priority, dealing with the Young Offenders Centre, getting that Secure College underway. I'm repeating to some extent what the Deputy Chair, Raymond McCartney, has said, but I would invite further comment in relation to that.
I mean, we would, and Brian will speak in more detail. Absolutely, Lord, when we have regular discussions with our senior colleagues, we have a very collegiate approach to the way that we work as a senior team, and equally we foster that with governors, with deputy governors, with functional heads. So we ought not to be having 3 prisons in isolation. Of course, we must be harvesting ideas and sharing good practice. So absolutely yes, and moving people across prisons is part of that, but also having opportunities to share good practice, to share resources and to share successes is absolutely key to that. But I'm sure Brian wants to say a bit more.
I've probably said this at the committee previously. I think when the courts take decisions to send somebody to prison and take away their liberty, that prisons are obliged to their assessment of risk and need to provide an opportunity for change. And prisons should be organised to provide that opportunity. And when I said earlier that I have evidence and I can see the transformational change happening in prisons, I only have to cite our Glen House, our Drugs-Free landing, the Family Matters landing, the day-to-day work that goes on in all of the prisons. But I think what you're touching on, the future for prisons, and where I have said that the prison officer will be central to all engagement and the coordination of all services to the prisoner. The focus must be on staff interactions with the prisoner as a person who will eventually be released, and preparing that person for eventual release. Their engagement must be consistent and constructive. Their job must now be about effecting change in that person who has offended, tackling distorted attitudes and behaviours, leading by example, rewarding progress. But their key job now is to be given hope and optimism to people who, I have to say, have failed or been failed by many of our institutions. And we now have them in prison for short periods, some for longer, but it's about giving hope and optimism, getting things done, and making every conversation count. That's what I think we need to put in place in every one of our establishments.
I think just to add to that, there are a number of things we've learned from McGilligan in terms of the quality of access to employment, the flexibility of movement, the breadth of the education that they're starting to put in place there that are being applied into Highbank in terms of, and there's a growing number of employment opportunities, identifying the education work that we're looking at with the colleges NI is going to make a huge difference to the quality of the basic stuff around English and maths. Is giving people, one day as a trial, the governor I think had 100% of his population in activity. So he's proved the art of the possible. Now it's repeating that on a daily basis, and it is about taking those kind of cultural things and how do we apply them to what is a fairly small jail at the moment that we can actually be quite imaginative with in terms of how we change and improve it.
I think my only final comment would be, we have a wide range of voluntary and community sector organisations providing services in our prisons, providing resettlement service around housing, employment, debt, income, family relationships, and we need to strengthen the coordination across those groups to maximise the impact that they can make, especially in the current climate.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Chair. And as Alban said, there's not much left. But I want to pick up on one point last week that the POA said that with the staff reductions, there's greater lock-up times, and this actually runs contrary to the reform programme that was outlined. The other issue I just want to cover is the healthcare and the addictions that you find in prison, how they're being handled. And I'll just read on the recommendation here that yourselves and the health service should review its suicide and self-harm prevention.
I'll ask Paul to talk about lockups because we've actually made that a key performance measure because we think it's so important. But Paul will talk a bit about that.
I think if I remember rightly, our colleagues in the POA were at pains to state that actually lockdowns aren't up. That there are times, particularly where we have high sickness absenteeism, that we have regime restrictions. But that doesn't cut across people when they're supposed to have association, and it doesn't cut across people when they're supposed to be out on exercise. And it doesn't stop people from getting to work. But if you're looking at lockdowns, at Maghaberry, it's down this year compared to last year. At Magilligan, there are no lockdowns. And at Highbank, it's down half this year compared to the same period last time. So it is something that's important to us. I could probably go on and talk about the drugs side as well if you want, because I think I think it's important that people understand the context with which we worked. I gave you figures earlier on that showed that drug consumption was down within prisons, but the population that we have is extremely challenging. I was at a cross-border policing event 3 weeks ago where it was explained that there are 348 psychoactive substances being used in the community, all of which present a challenge. And if you're looking at the sheer number of people in the community who take antidepressant drugs, 37.4 million antidepressant prescriptions each year. But that equates, now that was the figure that was quoted by PSNI, that equates to 22 prescriptions for every prescription items for every man, woman and child in Northern Ireland. And we take the most damaged and the most affected of those into our custody, which is why it's such a challenge to try and manage it. But we are reducing drug use in there. Our testing shows us that. And initiatives such as the pilot at Maghaberry will, we hope, help to reduce the problem in the future.
Yeah, it was just a quote from the POA last week. I think it was said, I was trying to find it, it was easier to get drugs on the inside and within prison than it was outside. I might have read that. How accurate was that?
In terms of the difference between prevalence of drugs in the community and in prisons, I suppose it goes back to what Paul said about we don't have a cross-section of society in prison. We have people for whom the most serious sanction is deemed to be necessary, people who have often fallen through all of the other nets that they've encountered before and during the criminal justice system. So we would expect it to be a more concentrated sample. I don't know where that POA figure came from, I have to say, Sean, I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Mr Elliott.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much. Apologies for missing just the start of your presentation. What percentage of the prison population do you believe would misuse drugs?
We have a statistic from this morning's Sir Ginny report, which I think suggested that almost 70% of people coming into our custody would be on. Paul's probably got them. Would be on some sort of prescription.
I think, sorry, there are two figures. The first is what proportion is taking some form of medication.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at medication at Maghaberry, it's over 80% of the population. If you're looking at those who illicitly take, we do have a good understanding because we randomly test a large sample of the population and baseline that, and that tells us that at Maghaberry it's 17%, at Magilligan it's 5%, and at Highbank Wood it's 14%. And that they're all significantly reduced on this time last year.
Right. How are those figures calculated, sorry, or how are those figures brought together?
But the illicit drugs, we randomly test a percentage of our population, a genuinely randomly generated sample, so it doesn't allow for what we think, and then we benchmark every month against that figure.
So there are only 15%, was it?
At Maghaberry, if you're looking at the first 2 quarters of this year, it's 17%. This time last year it was 33%. Magilligan 5%. This time last year 19%. Highbank 14%. This time last year 21%.
So effectively, in some cases, the use of illicit drugs has reduced by 50%
Yes.
a year. And is that being, is this percentage then using what should be prescription drugs, but misusing prescription drugs, is that increasing?
Within that figure is misuse of prescription items.
Okay. So really what we're saying is only 17% are misusing drugs in Maghaberry.
That's a baseline. There's empirical evidence behind random drug testing that says actually it can deviate a few percent either way. But as a broad measure, it shows you that that's around about the figure, but more significantly, it's a reducing figure.
Okay.
How have you achieved that, Paul? Sorry.
Well, we've done it, and we've always said we've done it in a number of ways through reducing the supply by better searching, so we find more, by reducing the demand, and we've done that through running the programmes, but also through changing the type of drugs that health colleagues prescribe to make them less attractive. And the third prong is about reducing the harm that drugs do, but it's a many-pronged approach.
we significantly, I think it was a significant factor, we did two things. We moved away from truly picking people at random all of the time and said follow intelligence, and if you follow intelligence, it's meant that we're now finding far more illicit items on our cell searches. Previously, when it was done defensively, when it was just done on a random basis, we rarely found items. Now we go where we believe the intelligence should be taking us, and you know, since 2010, it's a 113% increase in terms of what we're finding in cells because we're now following an intelligence pathway. The second bit is there's now a deterrent. There previously weren't sanctions applied to people who failed drug tests in prisons. They were encouraged to seek treatment. Now it's a carrot and a stick. We encourage them to take treatment. We offer them the opportunity by saying, here's a programme you can go on. But if you don't, there is a punitive measure to follow now through an adjudication.
The visitors, I know there was a police project as well to do with visits coming into Maghaberry. Has that reduced the number of drugs coming in through that route?
I certainly think that's helped in terms of deterrence. The fact that people knew that if they were caught in possession, then the public prosecutor would look to prosecute wherever they could. So we seized more items, and more have gone for prosecution as a result of it, and some people have served time because of it.
Oh, they're certainly impressive figures. Sorry, Todd.
No, Chair, it's an interesting issue because talking to some prison officers, you know, and while it's not carried out in any detail, their assessment, from what I'm hearing from them, they would indicate that there's a lot more than 17% in Maghaberry that they believe would be taking or using illegal drugs or illicit drugs. How are those samples carried out? Are they urine samples or blood samples, or are there hair follicle samples?
Yeah, it's 5% of the population every month at Maghaberry via urine, and at Hyde Bank it's 10%.
Okay. Are there any hair follicle samples used?
No, not yet. But one of the recommendations that's come out of the CGNE RQA report is to work with Health to revise our drug strategy policy, and they've actively encouraged us to look at how we test, whether it's hair, sweat, or other methods, and how we baseline. So we will be looking at that and have committed to returning to CGNE by the end of March next year with our response, the final document.
One other query just around Prison Officer Association comments last week about they felt they were understaffed, significantly understaffed, and they felt that they had the wrong process almost in Northern Ireland. They said was, I think the term they may have used, Chair, was something like an English model in an Irish prison.
Is it an English solution for an Irish model?
I'm just wondering, I'm only saying what they said, I'm not saying I agree with them. I'm just wondering how you react to that, particularly around the understaffing issue.
There is, I think what they were referring to actually is the way that we do the risk assessments that inform the decisions about safe staffing levels and the differential approach, so that we don't have a one size fits all. I mean, I'll ask Paul in a minute to just talk you through how that works, but it is simply untrue to say that we have brought an English set of procedures and decided to impose them on the Northern Ireland Prison Service. But I think it is about the risk assessments, isn't it, Paul?
I mean, let's be clear on what informs our decisions. We don't look to England and ask what are the staffing levels there. You can't contrast them. I was in Braid House yesterday, which had an unlock ratio of equivalent, if you broke down who was on there, 9 prisoners to every member of staff. And if that same accommodation was in England, it would be 30. So let's be really clear here that we've not followed the English model. What we have done is looked across the Europris network. So we've looked at our partners throughout Europe and also New Zealand to see what their staffing models are, what works successfully, and that's helped inform our decision-making process. But perhaps I think the sensitivity that exists with the trade union is we used to have a risk assessment model that said, before you make a decision on how you staff your prison, a risk assessment is produced, and by and large it was produced by a union official. And that made it very difficult to make efficiencies where we weren't yet in a state of grace where we could make efficiencies. We now have a model whereby in law, health and safety, the risk sits with the governor, the responsibility sits with the governor, so the governor commissions and undertakes that risk assessment process. I know that that's a sea change for the unions. I know that they would like to move away from that model, and I have formally given them the opportunity to write to me to set out their proposals as to how they would like to work more collaboratively together in the future.
So, are you telling us here today that the model that is in place is safe? It's a safe staffing model?
Yes.
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 Yeah.
And again, I think it's important to say that we all spend time in the prisons, and certainly I've made a point of spending a whole shifts on the residential units with those staff, with those staffing levels, to see and feel for myself whether they feel safe. And I have been confident that the way that we determine what the appropriate staffing levels are robust, and that the results we get are safe.
And crowding 186 men into Largan House, which was initially designed for 108 men, I would say was inherently unsafe.
Yeah.
And the model we've moved to now is one that has the governor's risk assessment saying we will not put more than 130 people into that location. And that has significantly diffused tensions within the main body of the prison at McGavery.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Mr Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks so much for your presentation. So, during your presentation, you talked about overcrowding, and you said that you're taking steps to reduce the overcrowding. What are the big issues that you face in terms of meeting targets that things will be much better, that we won't have that overcrowding? And secondly, what's the timescale for that?
Okay, well, we've done some things immediately, which Paul alluded to. We've opened additional accommodation and reopened some mothballed accommodation. So we've reopened one of the square houses that had been mothballed. We've opened Burren House, which is the step-down facility on the Crumlin Road. We've opened Shimner, which was a new build accommodation, which gives us 40 places. So we've opened new accommodation. At the same time, we've commissioned a piece of work to look at the reasons for the rise in prison population, so that we can actually start to address that. So we're doing it from both ends. We recently had a really successful seminar with the parole commissioners to look at recalls. We have a very high number of recalls to prison. The number of recalls is high, and the length of time it takes from recall to somebody being released from prison again is high. We've looked at whether there is the opportunity to provide step-up accommodation, so that if somebody is released from prison and their behaviour is giving cause for concern, instead of them being sent straight back to prison, there's something in between where they can be given appropriate support. We've been talking to sentencers and to our probation colleagues about giving the people who make the sentencing decisions more confidence in the alternatives to custody. We are absolutely clear that where custody is appropriate, it is appropriate, and we will take through our gates people that are sent to us and committed by the courts. That's what we do, that's our role. But we've been looking at reducing the population so that there are alternatives, providing alternatives in conjunction with our criminal justice partners, but also looking at providing additional accommodation and a more flexible use of the accommodation that we've got.
Do you feel that that's an ongoing process, and the timescale, how long is it going to take to feel satisfied that you've actually dealt with this?
Well, it's happening already, and we have seen some reduction in the level of crowding, significant reduction in the level of crowding, and a reduction in the population, but it will continue. We have to keep on top of it all of the time.
Secondly, you mentioned that report out this morning, and it said that 9 out of 10 prisoners are suffering from mental health issues. And obviously Northern Ireland, there are major problems of mental health right across the community. Fronto is much higher than here in other parts of the United Kingdom. A couple of questions. In terms of, I know what the report just out today, in terms of the 9 out of 10, or the 90%, do you have an idea of the breakdown of male-female?
I don't know that. Do you know that, Paul? What the breakdown would be?
No.
No. I mean, we can when we come to analyse the report, as you said, which has just been published today, and develop our response to that, we can share those figures.
And I was reading, I think it was a Prison Reform Trust report, and they talked about, prisoners having mental health problems. Their figure is something like 23%. Now, when I say 23% of male, but that was very much about people who are having anxiety and depression and such. But if you think of that figure, that's much lower in terms of the general mental health. Would that be the case in other parts of the United Kingdom in terms of the prisons?
Yeah, I mean, the statistics that the Prison Reform Trust produce, and they produce them twice yearly, are based on GB prisons, so they're not comparing like for like. But I wouldn't like to comment on the sort of veracity of those statistics, but that seems a low figure. And whether they're talking about acute mental illness, I don't know.
Yeah. And obviously there's a problem about men admitting health problems as well. And the third thing, just want to ask Paul, the limits you're talking about, the experiences in Europe and other parts. You mentioned New Zealand.
Yeah.
I was in New Zealand last year on the part of a holiday, and I visited the New Zealand Parliament. Yeah. Sad as I was, I was interested just in some of the prison figures there. So, can you tell us a wee bit about why New Zealand?
Yeah, the Europris Club would have the usual members and the usual suspects around it, but Europris allows other nations to buy in and become sort of sub-members. So you can't vote, you can share the information, and New Zealand are quite prominent in there, followed by the US.
Okay. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Mr McCartney had a health.
Just in relation to you see the interface between healthcare and yourselves. How does that work out in terms of the demands you make?
The demands we make on the services.
Yeah.
Well, healthcare is delivered by the trust.
Yeah.
They have the resources, we move the money across. So they come in and deliver healthcare in exactly the same way as they would in a primary care facility in the community. So they would run a GP clinic, they would run specialist clinics, they would run the dentists, they would run the acute care, they would determine if people needed outside hospital treatment. So we have no say in the access or the level of demand or supply.
But in terms of preventative, say in terms of drug strategy,
That's a really interesting question, actually, because we're continuing to discuss in partnership how we can do more, because we believe if we can do more on the preventative stuff, it's a spend to save, because it will actually save on the numbers of people who will suffer. And we're taking a very holistic approach to that. So for some time, we've been talking about some of the health initiatives that we've got ongoing. We've been speaking to Action Cancer about what we can do together with our health colleagues. We've now got an occupational therapist in post funded by the trust delivering health promotion. We're talking about smoking cessation. We're talking about weight management. All of those things which we think sleep clinics are held by the trust. So they're very open to doing more with us on the preventative side. Like us, though, they will be subject to financial constraints, and they will have to determine what resources they can allocate in prisons. But it is, strictly speaking, health is the responsibility of the Health Trust to deliver. We're having a continuing debate about social care, and there's a piece of work being taken forward by Paul and one of his colleagues in the DHSSPS about how we determine what the gap is and how we deliver for that. So it's true partnership.
and in community development in terms of drug prevention, would there be any?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
And the pilot that ran, for example, the pilot in Glen House, the drug recovery unit, that was Start 360. And again, we ran that through a tendering exercise which they competed for. So we make sure that we get best value for money in that respect. But that was paid for by us. But there was an input from health. They put a GP into that pilot as well to make sure that there was some healthcare input, and they'll be part of the evaluation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Mr. McGuinness?
Yeah, just one point that I overlooked, Chair. You did mention that as far as savings were concerned, that the department has indicated that you will no longer be able to hold on to savings. that you make as a result of the reform programme. You've been officially informed of that, have you?
Well, I think that's the approach that happens now. So whereas in the good old days, for want of a better term, any savings that we made, we could suggest that we reinvest them. Now, the situation across the department and indeed across government is such that any savings that are identified will inevitably have to form part of the package of savings. Is that in a nutshell?
Yeah. So as you can probably imagine, the savings were considerable year on from 500 and stuff coming to 300 replacement. We hope to have a fair amount of money to be able to reinvest. Given the nature of the reductions year on year within our budgets, that's money that actually has kind of left us standing still in some respects in terms of our efficiencies. And I suppose in many respects we look at actually what we've done in terms of delivering reform has actually protected us to some degree in terms of giving us the right foundations to be able to take forward the organisation. If we hadn't gone through some of these reforms and the kind of budget constraints, would have put us into some very difficult decisions.
But the point, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but the point I'm making is that really it's a double hit for you. You've carried out a reform programme, you've made some efficiencies and some savings as a result of that. Next year and possibly this year, you're asked to make further efficiencies and savings on top of what you've achieved.
Yes.
That seems to me to be a very difficult situation for you and perhaps an unfair burden to place on the prison service. Would that be your view?
Well, we would see that we are part of the Department of Justice and that we have as well as being an agency, we have a corporate responsibility. And indeed, we're now part of a wider Directorate of Reducing Offending. Yep. So we would try to be solution focused in terms of identifying where we can make savings. What we also do, though, is we flag up to the Permanent Secretary and to others what the risk of certain choices will be, whether that's the risk of curtailing the regime or the risk of doing less in terms of interventions. So that we know that the reality for us, as for all public sector organisations in the future, will be that finances will be much more challenging. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Another member? Oh, sorry. Mr Dixon, apologies.
Okay. Thank you for all the information which you brought to us today. Can I concentrate again on the issue of healthcare and the quality of the healthcare that is being delivered? Can you tell us how you measure the quality of that healthcare and to what extent you have an interaction with our QIA?
Well, the short answer is we don't measure the quality of the healthcare. That healthcare is the responsibility of the South Eastern Trust under the auspices of the DHSPS. It is commissioned by the Health and Social Care Board. And any complaints about healthcare are not dealt with through the Prisoner Ombudsman. They're dealt with through the Health Trust's internal complaints process. However, we do have a series of meetings. We have a strategic partnership meeting every 2 months, which is chaired by the South Eastern Trust Chief Executive, which I attend, which Paul attends. There is then an operational level board, which is chaired by Paul and his counterparts in health, and then there are meetings at establishment level, so that delivery can be discussed. We do have some shared performance measures. So, for example, we share measures on things like cancelled appointments, where in the past that's been an issue where outside hospital appointments are cancelled for want of escorting staff. So we've got that down to very, very low levels. So we have shared performance targets where that's appropriate. But in terms of the actual quality of healthcare delivery, that is a matter for the healthcare providers.
And I understand that, but if that quality were to drop or become unsatisfactory, then that has the potential to reflect back in terms of distress, disturbance, and other activities. And it's really that interface that I'm trying to understand how you measure that. I appreciate that health is responsibility for the delivery of the health service, but what I want to know is how you measure or how you perceive the success of that within the organisation.
And that is a challenge. That is a continuing challenge for us, because you're absolutely right. The quality of healthcare delivery, an example I often give, if somebody's got toothache and they can't get to see a dentist, the repercussions in terms of the pressure on that individual and on our prison service colleagues can be significant, and you can actually end up with a situation that, you know, for want of a health intervention, a situation that becomes quite serious. But we can do no more than continue to work closely with our healthcare colleagues. And as recently as this morning, we've had discussions with Health Trust colleagues about how we continue this debate to make them understand that whilst offender health may not always be a high priority for them, we are committed to equivalence, to people in prison getting a healthcare service equivalent to that delivered in the community.
And indeed, if you take that to extraction analogy to further, while there may be members of the public wouldn't necessarily be terribly sympathetic to a prisoner who has a toothache and the need to have a tooth extracted, the reality is that the knock-on effect for a prisoner, for you, who is in pain, has the potential to cause substantially different disruption inside a prison than they would if they were at home.
Yes, absolutely right. And we know that our healthcare colleagues, particularly ones who've been recruited to work for the Trust since health was transferred over, have been learning very quickly about how that different environment operates. So at the working level, there is a very good relationship between the nurses and the doctors and the specialists delivering healthcare in prisons and the prison service staff. The debate that we need to continue is around the shared commitment, and that will be encapsulated in the Justice Health Strategy, which is part of the prison reform, one of the 40 recommendations of the prison reform team.
And where is that strategy at this stage?
That's continuing, and that is we're currently doing a piece of work to identify what the social care gaps are, so that we can determine what is currently not being delivered, what needs to be delivered, and who should deliver it, because that's a key part. And the rest of the strategy continues and will be probably one of the final ones to be delivered in terms of the 40, because it's one of the most complex and has been one of the very challenging ones, to be frank.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for coming to the committee. Appreciate your time. I know it's been a long session, but worthwhile. So thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, members. We'll move on through the rest of the agenda. Item 5, the Department of Justice is proposing to make a statutory rule that'll update the list of organisations at section 46(1) of the Justice Act 2002 that the CJI for Northern Ireland has the power to inspect to ensure the legislation remains relevant and accurate. At the meeting on the 3rd of June, the committee considered and agreed with the content of the proposed changes to the list. The statutory rule is subject to draft affirmative procedure on the 7th of October. There have been no changes to that policy content since it was submitted to the committee, and the examiner has confirmed that he has no issues in respect of any technical aspects to the bill. The Minister intends to schedule the debate on the statutory rule after the Halloween recess, and if members are then content with the statutory rule, then I'll formally put that question that the Committee for Justice considered the draft statutory rule SR, the Justice Northern Ireland Act 2002 amendment of section 46(1) Order Northern Ireland 2014, and recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly. Agreed? Agreed. Item 6, on the Legal Aid and Coroners Courts Bill received royal assent and has commenced. The legislation governing civil legal aid will transfer from the 1981 order to the Access to Justice Northern Ireland Order 2003, and civil legal aid will become civil legal services. In order to commence civil legal services under the 2003 order, it is necessary to bring forward a range of subordinate legislation. As part of this, the Department is bringing forward proposals for 2 statutory rules. The Civil Legal Services Cost Regulations, which make provision for costs to be awarded to parties at the end of a civil case, in which legal aid has been a feature. The Civil Legal Services Cost Protection Regulations 2015 will make provision for the circumstances in which costs protection will apply and when it will not apply in civil cases in which legal aid has been a feature. Subject to the views of the committee, the Department intends to conduct a short targeted consultation on the draft regulations with key stakeholders that may have an interest in their content, and it is proposed that the regulations would come into operation on the 1st of April next year. So if members are content with the proposed statutory rules, unless more information is required, we'll indicate our contentment. Okay, content. Item 7. At our meeting on the 17th of September, the committee agreed that it was content with the draft guidance from the Attorney-General for Northern Ireland for the Courts and Tribunal Service in relation to support for victims and witnesses. That draft guidance was laid in the Assembly on the 8th of October as required. The Attorney has now provided information on the proposed statutory rule, which will bring the guidance into operation on the 15th of December this year. The rule is subject to negative resolution procedure. Members are content with that proposed statutory rule, then we will indicate content.
Great, John.
Item 8, the Department has indicated it intends to undertake a public consultation examining the use of expert witnesses in the courts in Northern Ireland and has provided the draft consultation document and an executive summary for consideration. The purpose of the consultation is to consider the deployment and remuneration arrangements for expert witnesses in the justice system who are funded from the legal aid budget. The document invites comments on how current arrangements might be strengthened to ensure expert testimony can make most useful and appropriate contribution and is cost effective, and sets out a number of approaches and options. So if members are content to note this proposed consultation, unless there's any more clarity needed, we'll and duly noted. Item 9. At our meeting on the 8th of October, the committee considered a written briefing paper from the Department outlining pension scheme design changes that are needed to the Public Sector Pensions Act 2014, which would be made by way of subordinate legislation, which is subject to affirmative resolution process. The Department indicated the police pension scheme was one of the schemes affected, and the secondary legislation needed to be in operation by the 1st of April 2015. The Department has now written advising that it is proposing to undertake a limited and targeted consultation on the Police Pensions Transitional and Consequential Provisions Regulations Northern Ireland 2014, and has provided a copy of the draft regulations and the consultation letter. Given the limited targeted consultation is necessary, there is a risk that members of the police pension scheme in the transitional category could be disadvantaged if these consequential and transitional changes are delayed. It will also enable the required statutory rules for each scheme to be debated and dealt with by affirmative resolution on the same day. The DFP is planning that draft regulations for all public sector schemes will be laid in the Assembly for affirmative resolution in November of this year, and that would then be debated in January of next year. So it's just for members to note those details, unless there's some more clarity needed. We'll duly note it. Item 10, members will be familiar with this. The Minister did write to the committee and all MLAs on the 15th of October. That was to provide a summary of the most relevant key findings of the research into prostitution in Northern Ireland. That was commissioned by DOJ from Queen's University, indicating that the research report would be uploaded to the Department's website. So that information, obviously, members will now be familiar with and is there for noting. Correspondence, there's 11 items, and I'll draw attention to those that are necessary. Item 3 is correspondence from the Committee for Finance and Personnel, providing a copy of a briefing that it received from officials from DFP on the departmental saving plans. The briefing paper highlights a shortfall of approximately 7% against the 13-14 year target of 103.4 million of savings for the Department of Justice, and that in relation to the 14-15 year, the Department has forecast that it does not anticipate delivery in full of its savings target. So if members are content, we request a breakdown of the shortfall in 2013-14 and the expected shortfall in 2014-15 from the Department, and further information on the potential impact of what these shortfalls could be. read item 1 on the tabled pack. Correspondence from the Department advising that the minimum criteria to be applied by the Policing Board when appointing the next Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland has now been changed. Okay, so that's there for members' information. Unless there's any further clarity needed, we'll duly note it. Is there any comments on the correspondence that I've neglected? If not, we'll agree to action it. I have no chairman's business. Mr. McGuinness, you've
Yes,
an
I
item
have just
for
one
any other
item.
business?
Just in relation to, there was a communication from the Minister for Justice in relation to the Law Commission, saying that he proposed to end its tenure. Now, I think that we should have a further report on that. I do think that it has provided very useful advice to the public generally, to the Department and to the Assembly. And I think it's important to have that expertise preserved. This Assembly in itself has a research facility and so forth, but the expertise that the Law Commission has is considerable. And I think to do away with that particular asset would be damaging to public life generally. The other point I would make, and this is a more political point, the Criminal Justice Review included a proposition, I recall, that there should be a law commission of some sort. And this would represent a departure from the Criminal Law Review. And I think that is a political decision, and one which needs to be examined. And I think that is unhelpful, and it represents a departure politically from what was agreed. However, that's a political point. Some colleagues may or may not agree with that, but I do think that we should examine the issue at any rate.
Okay. Are members intent that we would write to the Department around that particular issue? Any other business?
Chair, I was just going to ask, in light of this last 2 weeks, we've talked a lot about prison issues, and A, have we ever had a visit to a prison? You've been in chair on that. And B, would that be feasible? Because that would be something I would be interested in. Because it's okay reading stuff and listening, but going and seeing is believing, that's it.
Members will keep me right. I think the committee officially, as a committee, went to each of the establishments, certainly Hydebank, Gilligan. What has the committee
In the first mandate.
Yeah.
The first mandate, the committee did officially.
Sure, Senator.
Subsequently, I mean, I know I was invited by Sue and her predecessor. Well, I think I went and asked, and then I was told I could, and they had facilitated arrange, so there was no problem.
But I think the point that has been raised is important that the committee, as a committee, visits rather than individuals. I know we've all visited individually, but as a committee, I think it might be a worthwhile exercise. But when that
Is there one in particular, Shami, you were thinking?
Not myself, I was just thinking we could maybe have our meeting there, one of the big rooms, whatever, but also to maybe look at some of the issues there.
Yeah, I know we did. We can't have it because we had it in McGilligan.
Right.
So we did then. Now it's a Cat C prison, which I think made it easier to.
I thought we were at Hydebank as well, were we not?
We're in Hydebank, but I think the committee officially had a.
Not have a meeting.
We had a meeting twice, I think.
Did we not meet in Hydebank?
No,
Not as a committee, no.
we didn't hold the actual committee meeting.
What do you mean?
The committee visited Hydebank.
I think we visited to see the scanner, didn't it?
We also, individual members, some committee members visited to see the scanner separately at a different time. The committee itself did visit Hydebank. The very first Justice Committee visited Cabray, and this committee also visited McGilligan and held a meeting in McGilligan. but it does represent some challenges for the prison service because the meetings are held in public and whatever, so
Yeah.
unless you decide not to do that, it
Public
does
aspect
represent
of
some
it.
issues.
Public aspect. Because I know, like, I've done the McGabry on a number of occasions where they've done these sort of round-robin discussions with community and voluntary sector and professionals, like, and there's really 50 people in the chapel, with the sort of the church area, but maybe the public aspect is where you're...
If you wanted, we could look at whether you want to do a visit to McGabry again, and we could feature some sort of round table discussions with certain groups if you've particular interest in talking to voluntary groups that are working in there, or healthcare side, or we could
Well,
look at that.
I'm content if any member can go into any prison at any time, so long as it's arranged. So there's nothing to preclude any elected member from doing that. But in terms of an official committee visit,
More
I
difficult.
think probably given that McGilligan and Hydebank we have done within this current mandate, but McGabry we haven't. So you may well want to have a look at McGabry as an official committee visit. It's not that exciting, but
I have to propose that. I mean, I'm happy to propose that then, Chair.
yeah. Well, we'll factor it into the forward work programme and try and identify an opportunity to do that. We'll discuss exactly what we would want to get out of a visit and try and bottom out a proper agenda for it. So happy to do that. No other business? Okay. Thank you very much.
Committee Room 21. This is the Northern Ireland